welcome back to Fast Market. I'm Alex Coffey alongside Kevin Hinks. Now time for our cash tag segment. We're going to look at a very interesting space, the big box retail space. We'll throw Amazon in there as well. We're really going to focus in here on Costco. To help us do that, I want to welcome in the co-founder of LikeFolio.com, Andy Swan, and joining me here in studio is TD Ameritrade Network contributor Jenny Horn. Jenny, you just mentioned here on the break, Costco hit a new all-time high.
Yes, I mean, a good day to talk about it because it's up today hitting a new all-time high, but it's also been in a pretty steady uptrend for the last few months, and now it's actually sent its valuation to record high levels as of this August. But what they'd really continue to do very well is deliver same-store sales growth, and many are wondering if they can continue at this level of compounding growth. But for the month of July, they've reported about 14% in year-over-year increase in their same-store sales. Now, on an adjusted basis, their Canadian operations led the way, but excluding their currency and gas prices, the U.S. posted actually the highest same-store sales of about 8.5% year-over-year. Now, the same-store sales growth we saw in July was comparable to June, but actually lags their May levels. But regardless, what's really interesting is they're able to maintain some of the members they gained during the pandemic, and that's sort of why we saw such a positive reaction to these numbers last week. I mean, analysts across the board were very, very positive on the same-store sales growth we saw for Costco in the month of July. Now, this uptick in COVID cases amid this ongoing Delta variant, it could actually provide upside for Costco as we see this sort of eating at home and, getting food for home trends sort of revert to what we saw, say, a year ago. But there is this concern that with the rising inflation rates and business growth rates expected to actually slow, that this could eventually catch up with Costco because it seems like they've sort of been inflation-proof. We hear different headlines about the rising cost of meat prices, labor shortages, and somehow Costco has sort of managed to make it out unscathed. That's really interesting to me, honestly. And the noise on social media this morning, super positive, and especially from a trading perspective, which is something I don't always see. So that brings me to our first tweet of the day, which says, Costco has become the flex of the upper middle class. This stock cannot be stopped 150 points later. It's still undervalued, hyper bullish. So really, I saw a lot of this super positive tweet, and this is really pretty much as positive as you could get. And what I actually liked that they talked about was sort of what they call the flex of the upper middle class, because you really cannot walk into Costco without spending, at least me, $200-300, and I'm just buying for myself. So I would have to say that something about that seems super successful for their business model, because you don't just go to Costco and buy a small ticket item. At least I've never been able to do that. But our next tweeter focuses on more of this big box retail space and sort of mentions this, sort of competition with Amazon, which says Costco fell 8% on the day Amazon announced they were buying Whole Foods. The stock is up 183% since. So what this company has done a very good job doing is sort of remaining Amazon-proof. And I have to say, Andy, that people that shop at Costco and people that have Costco memberships, they must be happy because they take to social media and love to talk about their Costco membership and how great it is. And it's sort of almost like this cult-like following. And I have to imagine that although I am very happy as an Amazon consumer and Costco, that I have to think Costco consumers are a smidge happier.
Yeah, you nailed it. What's not to like about Costco? You've got bulk goods, you've got good prices. Everybody seems to like it. When we look at consumer happiness mentions across these major retailers, Amazon, Costco, and other competitors, Costco consistently comes in on top in terms of their consumers' happiness. And, that is a really important factor for this company because they do count on membership driven revenue. They count on people renewing their subscriptions to be able to come into the store, and then of course shopping in the store at the low margin profit levels that Costco can do on a per item basis. So consumer happiness is a great forward-looking indicator for this company. It has been for a long time. We've been bullish on it for quite a while, and part of the reason was that very high level of consumer happiness in a subscription type of model. On the other hand, I know that there's some questions around, whether the latest, COVID-related news is inspiring that sort of consumer stockpiling fever that we saw at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. And I have to say, there is a permanent behavior shift. Stockpiling mentions are still 13% higher than they were in 2019, but nothing compared to what we saw in 2020, and really no blip on the radar yet in terms of reaction to this Delta variant and the various news cycles around that. So that was a big boon for Costco in terms of bringing new members in the door. But it's the consumer happiness levels. The experience inside the store is so good, and the consumer happiness is so high that anytime they get a chance to bring new members in the door, they do a really, really good job of keeping them, and we don't see that changing anytime soon for Costco.
All right, Andy, these numbers that we see out of Costco, 90% retention or renewal rate of their memberships. Plus, they're adding boatloads of new members. They sell high quality merchandise and services at attractive prices. All right, you take your LikeFolio hat off, Andy, and put on your Walmart hat. How does Walmart get closer to Costco? What can they do? If you got hired by Walmart to change their company and close the gap between the unbelievable shopping experience at Costco and what most people can conceive as a less positive experience at Walmart, even though you don't have to pay a membership fee, how would you close that gap between those two? Because right now, it looks like a one-horse race, and Costco is just off to the races.
Well, I would do exactly what Walmart is doing, and that is keep people out of my stores and keep them shopping online and bring them the goods at the low prices directly. I think that's the biggest difference. You go into a Walmart store, it's a very different experience than going into a Costco store. There are some exceptions. Walmart's done some nice jobs in some areas, some nice facelifts to their stores, but Costco has this huge advantage of it being members only, and that keeps kind of the riffraff out, if you will. And Walmart doesn't have that advantage and can't have that advantage except for in their Sam's Club, which has similar numbers to Costco. So it is really just the fact that it's members only that's driving a lot of that consumer happiness level. So if I were Walmart, I'd do exactly what Walmart's doing, and that is focus on online e-commerce sales. They're doing a very good job of that, and I do think that Walmart will benefit from that long term. But for now, you're right, Costco in a league of its own.
Andy, building on that, though, I mean, it's hard to discount the success that Walmart has had over the years as it is. And so I would almost say, there's a place, we tied this into the airline conversation from yesterday, there's a place for a Spirit Airlines, a Southwest Airlines in the market. There's also, at some point, first-class tickets as well. And so there's a market that Walmart's meeting that maybe Costco is meeting a different market, and there's a place for both of these companies. We might like to complain about our experience at Walmart, but we still go. My question to you, though, also relates to the airline industry, and that we saw a lot of the kind of individual trends in terms of behavioral shift in terms of taking a trip and all that kind of holding in there. TSA numbers are still strong. Leisure travel is still strong. We talked about this just yesterday, Andy. I'm not seeing major consumer shifts in terms of stockpiling mentioned, so that tells me one of two things. The headlines aren't what people are actually reacting to, or we're about to see a major shift. As a data guy, are you more focused on the fact that we haven't seen it yet, or are you just waiting for this to happen?
I'm actually more focused on the fact that we haven't seen it yet, because the headlines have been so invasive and so over the top in terms of volume that you would think that people would be reacting by now, and we're just not seeing it in our data. The other kind of interesting data point, kind of a knock against Costco, if we want to come up with one, we had to search pretty far to come up with one, but one is the back to school shopping season. We're actually seeing a little bit of a dip compared to 2019 levels in back to school shopping at Costco. So I don't think that they're winning the back to school shopper, which is a rejuvenated, revived segment, and they're not winning that right now versus Target, Walmart, and other peers. And so I think their August numbers may disappoint. You got to remember, this is a company that reports its revenue numbers on a monthly basis. We see some signs that August may not be as robust as we've gotten used to over the past few months in terms of revenues beating street expectations. But that's about the only negative that we could find for Costco at the moment.
So, Andy, my question to you is, because we've really seen these secular trends with retail as across the board, where people are starting to really like to go to one place and one place only to do all their shopping. And I think the pandemic sort of accelerated this trend. But with Costco, we haven't even mentioned the fact that they sell, clothing. They sell, I think, engagement rings. They also have rental cars, which, of course, we know from just, talking about this, that's been a huge spike over the last year. So are some of their non-grocery items sort of propelling happiness? Because really, you can go to Costco and buy just about everything. I think you can book a vacation even, whereas, that is not going to be your experience so much at a Target or a Walmart, which have less happiness, according to your data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other kind of missing factor here is that with the rise in gas prices, people are seeking out the very best deals they can find on gas. And most of the time that is at Costco. So that brings people to the store more often than when gas was $2 a gallon and not such an expensive item. And so it's kind of interesting that, the consumer pain felt by rising energy prices is actually, bringing more and more eyeballs and more foot traffic to Costco locations.
Andy, as we kind of put a wrap on the conversation, put a bow on it here, Costco, the description you're giving and the kind of the narrative you're laying out here is a very positive one, but I think it's important to distinguish why. Because I think we've probably seen a bid into the stock that's tied to, Delta variant and COVID-19 and stockpiling, because that's what we saw originally. But it sounds like what you describe, Andy, is a much more long-term path to success that Costco's laid out and that they're capitalizing on, which is they've grown their membership tremendously, but they're keeping these members and they're making a very, very happy experience. And so when you look at this on a long-term basis, it sounds like you're painting a positive picture, but you've also watched the stock run up, 50% since March nearly. Has it just gone too far too fast in the near term?
It does kind of feel like it. I think that there's expectations of things that aren't happening, which is, the recipe for short-term pain. And that is, there's expectations that consumers are stockpiling. There's expectations that that's driving new membership. And we don't see any evidence of that, at least nothing compared to what we saw in 2020. So I do think that there is near-term risk to the stock in that expectations may not live up to reality.
Good stuff. Andy Swan, the co-founder of LikeFolio.com. Have a great rest of your day, and thanks for joining us as always.